I know Honda is providing assurances today that this won't be the case. How concerned are you about it potentially being beyond the foreseeable future, maybe a few weeks later than that?
Well, look, as every day passes and these tariffs remain in place, the risk to the industry becomes higher and higher. Just last week, a report came out from the Center for Automotive Research that found that the costs incurred by manufacturers in the U.S. of these tariffs is going to exceed $108 billion US, impacting almost 18 million vehicles. That's not just on the Canadian side, that's across North America. So every day these tariffs are in place, costs are incurred, damage is done to the industry, and ultimately we're weakening the North American auto sector.
So what are your primary questions, I guess, for the federal government as far as their counter-tariff and other kind of tariff-associated policy is concerned at this point?
Well, look, the announcement today with respect to the emissions framework is the best policy in a series of very bad choices. We're in a very difficult position because of U.S. trade policy. What the federal government has put forward is meant to give manufacturers that have a footprint here the ability to continue to import cars so they can remain profitable, but while also securing the footprint by threatening to remove that ability should production slow down. At the end of the day, the objective needs to be getting to the negotiating table as quickly as possible with the Americans once our election is over and finding a permanent solution here. This is not good economic policy what the Americans are pursuing. The costs are just simply too high for this industry. So we've got to get back to a North American market where we have integrated supply chains. That has to be number one objective. And frankly, if that doesn't work out, then we consider other options. But I don't want to go there at this point.
Do you, and I understand why you wouldn't, but are you worried about the proposition that you just put forward not essentially lining up with the world that Donald Trump has dreamt up for himself or the type of economy that he's dreamt up for himself?
Always a risk. But look, I just come back to the numbers, and what the U.S. is doing right now is potentially going to drive their own economy into a recession. And when you think about the automotive supply chain, it's not just about North America. There are components and parts that are coming in from around the world that are now being tariffed. Think about the tariff on China, which controls 80% of the global EV battery supply chain. 145% tariff on those inputs. This is going to make the industry deeply uncompetitive while other manufacturers around the world are not exposed to these costs. So I just come back to the fact that this is bad for America and therefore it can't be pursued to the fullest extent. That's why I do think we're going to get to the table and we'll find an off-ramp. And, we did just negotiate a deal with the Americans and it was lauded as the best agreement ever negotiated. So I think we've got a good place to start from.
What are your conversations like with, the manufacturers, for example, that everyone is so worried about leaving? Like I interviewed the industry minister a number of weeks ago, and she said she had conversations where she got assurances, but there is a tacit acknowledgement in the counter-tariff structure they announced today that the possibility exists. Like, are you getting any assurances?
I think the biggest problem out there right now is just uncertainty around how all of this works. It's very difficult to plan. I mean, this is a sector that has very long lead times. When you think about the time it takes to design a new vehicle, set up your manufacturing facility for it, bring it to market, long lead times and capital intensive. Right now, we can't even get clear answers from the Americans on really basic questions about how these tariffs are being implemented. The tariff on Canada is supposed to be 25%, but you back out your U.S. content in the vehicle. It's not clear how you actually do that because the implementing direction from the U.S. hasn't specified a timeline for how that process would take place. So deep uncertainty in an industry that needs long time horizons and makes major capital investments. So what happens in these situations, and we saw this during the last negotiation of the USMCA, is that companies just hold off making decisions because you can't make decisions in this environment, and that's bad for the economy.
And is that what you're seeing? Like, is there an inertia around investment decisions?
Now is not the environment to be making major automotive decisions. That's absolutely certain because U.S. trade policy is changing by the minute. If the Americans were committed to creating a U.S.-only supply chain, you would need to see signals that this was meant to be a long-term policy that they were going to pursue to the fullest extent. Instead, what we see is tariffs go in force, pressure is put on the administration either through markets or through other forces, and the whole plan changes overnight. So in that type of environment where there is absolutely no clarity, it's very difficult to make long-term investment decisions. So I think that's what we're going to see for the next few weeks, if not months. You'll have to delay all of this until we have clarity around what the trade relationship is going to look like and what the Americans are ultimately trying to achieve here.
Okay, Brian, I'll leave it on that note. Thanks for making the time for the conversation tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.